All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and the brand new Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. And I've recorded more than 5,500 interviews since 2003, almost all on foreign policy, and all available for you at scotthorton.org. You can sign up for the podcast feed there, and the full interview archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. All right, you guys, on the line, I've got James Carden from Acura, which stands for Let's Get Along with Russia instead of this. And here he wrote this thing at The Nation with Katrina Vanden Heuvel, the publisher of The Nation, and we reprinted it at antiwar.com. It's called The Ukraine Aid Package Heightens the Risk of Escalation. Welcome back to the show. James, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me back.
Very happy to talk to you again. And that's the American Committee on East-West Accord, or U.S.-Russian Accord, right? Because you changed it.
We renamed it a few years ago. It's the American Committee for U.S.-Russia Accord.
U.S.-Russia Accord. There you go. That's what I meant to say back when I forgot what it was called for a second there. Yeah. Anyways, happy to talk to you again, and happy to read your great article here. You start out in the article, and so let's start out this interview with the Washington, D.C. thing here. Speaker Mike Johnson gave in on the Ukraine aid after months of Republican obstruction. We all knew it couldn't last. But so one of the things was Trump said, well, geez, why don't you make it a loan, which of course means wink, wink, guaranteed loan, which means they don't ever have to pay it back. But that helped break the impasse. But also you talk about how the CIA or whoever, the National Intelligence Directorate, they took Mike Johnson in the back room and laid down the law and let him know how it really goes. Is that what happened here?
Well, that's what it seems like. According to a very good report from Jonathan Martin in Politico, Martin talked to not only Johnson, but a number of Johnson's colleagues, like Michael McCaul from he's the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and a number of others. And Martin noted that they were all saying the same thing when he spoke to them independently of one another. And they were using this language that will be familiar to you and your listeners. They were referring to a new axis of evil. But this time the axis is Russia, China, and Iran. And Johnson, to his credit, said, where's this coming from, guys? And they said, well, we got briefed by the IC, the intelligence community. And when you get these briefings, you can see that, it's all connected. So basically, the question that Katrina and I raised in the piece is that it's, very possible that we're once again, just like in the days of W, confronting the specter of politicized intelligence, because it seems very likely that Biden sent members of the IC to the Hill to scare the hell out of these people, and that's been something that administrations have been doing, forever. There's a famous example of Truman's Secretary of State, Dean Acheson, saying, we have to make our case to Congress clearer than truth. Which means not true at all. And, they use the privilege of their position in the intelligence community to scare these guys. And that's kind of what it seems like, because, they're saying things like, if we don't send this aid package to Ukraine, Putin is not only going to take over the entirety of Ukraine, he's going to roll into Eastern Europe, which is really just complete fantasy. So anyway, those were the kinds of issues and topics that we raised in the piece.
Yeah, and so isn't it interesting? Nobody notices that the propaganda has changed from, listen, we have to help Ukraine because they can beat Russia. They're going to destroy Russia. They're going to force them out, and including Crimea. They're going to win this war. And now you want to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat here, man? Don't do it. And that's now replaced by, oh no, Russia's definitely going to win. And if we don't stop them here, they're going to defeat everybody else too.
Right. And it's pure fantasy because frankly, the first time around, the Russians didn't even make it to Kyiv. There's very little evidence that they want the lands beyond what are known as the lands of Novorossiya, which are the traditional, Russian-speaking lands in the south and east of that country. The Russians would be very foolish indeed if they tried to take over the entirety of Ukraine, because they would be dealing then with a very fierce insurgency. So that's not something that analysts think, are on the cards. Certainly, people like John Mearsheimer, believe that that would be a very, very foolish thing for the Russians to do. There's very little evidence that they would be able to take over the entirety of the country, and there's even less evidence that they want to take on more than Ukraine anyway. They can't, and they won't. But the Biden administration are using these scare tactics on these kind of credulous members of Congress to get their way.
And that's the thing about it, is how credulous they are. This is the Speaker of the House, but he didn't spend his weekends reading. He just is out in the park playing ball with the kids or whatever. He didn't know anything about this. He can't put up a resistance, an argument at all against these guys when they come and tell him this stuff. You have to believe this, Mr. Speaker. And he's like, I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, there seems to be very little in Johnson's background that would indicate that he's equipped for the job that he has.
Yeah. And same goes for all of them, too. I remember, I think it was a big Yemen vote was going on, and Max Blumenthal was asking congressmen on their way to work outside the Capitol, hey, you're a congressman. What do you think about the Yemen bill? And every single one of them was like, what's a Yemen? What are you talking about? One of them said, listen, man, I do tax reform. I don't know about that. It's like, well, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that. That's a very Max thing to do. And thank God he does it. But that's right. I would be very surprised if you gave a map of Europe even to your average congressman without the names of the countries and asked them to point out, where Ukraine is, for instance, or where Moldova is, for instance, or even getting down into the nitty gritty, asking them to point out where, Transnistria is, or the Luhansk region. I think that there would be, a lot of non-answers or wrong answers. But that's the way the Hill operates. You have these people who don't really know very much, and then they're advised by people who seem to know even less.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a great example of that when Vivek Ramaswamy in the debate asked Nikki Haley to name the provinces in eastern Ukraine that she's ready to fight for. And which was quite a gamble, right? Like, she might have read a little something about it, but he caught her completely flat-footed. She couldn't even name Donetsk,
I didn't know that. That's terrific.
Yeah.
Especially considering, she was the UN ambassador under Trump.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, which goes, I mean, to me, like, okay, granted, I got an anti-war bent or whatever, but this stuff is interesting anyway. Like, if I was some scumbag senator, I would still, like, even if I wasn't reading antiwar.com, I would want to be reading a little something about this from, I guess I'd read The Atlantic or whatever, but I would know the names of the provinces in question. I'd want to know what's going on,
Yeah, I mean, you have people who do have some knowledge. I would wager that someone like, let's take like the apex maniac of the United States Senate, Lindsey Graham. I'm sure that he does know where these places are. The problem is that he's just so completely unhinged. I mean, did you see his recent floor speech? It was right before the April 23 vote. It's available on YouTube, and it is disturbing. He basically makes the case, the non-existent case, that if we didn't pass the aid packages for Israel, Taiwan, and Ukraine, there would be another 9/11. And then his aides put up behind him an enormous picture of the Twin Towers engulfed in flames on 9/11. I mean, that is the really the cheapest kind of
Wait, he was
scaremongering.
saying that about Israel, or he was saying that about Russia and Ukraine?
He was making the case that it's all tied together because of course, something Iran with these guys. So, the Russians are getting Iranian drones, and therefore we have, an axis of evil, et cetera, et cetera.
It's completely crazy. It always reminds me of that time where they were in Iraq, or maybe they were like in Kuwait or something doing a PR thing. But they'd been to Iraq. I think they were actually in Iraq. And John McCain accuses Iran. Oh, this is '07, when they were, Cheney and Petraeus were conspiring to try to get us into war with Iran. And McCain
Yeah.
goes out there and goes, Iran has taken Al Qaeda in Iraq, and they're taking them into Iran for training, and they're using them to blow up our guys. And then Joe Lieberman is there, and on mic, he gets up on his tiptoes and whispers in McCain's ear and says, just say militants, John. Just say militants. Because, of course, the Iranians were backing the Sadrists and the Supreme Islamic Council's Badr Brigade and so forth in their war against Al-Qaeda in Iraq during that war. And so here's McCain as like the worst hawk in the entire Senate, like other than Bush and Pearl and Crystal, like he is the guy most responsible for launching that war, tied with Biden. One of the ones most responsible for launching that war. And he doesn't even know who's in the East and who's in the West. He didn't know the first thing about it. It's the same thing with all of them, really. What am I supposed to say? They ask,
Yeah. I don't think McCain had much of a reputation as a scholar to begin with.
Yeah. And it's not like while he was riding in the limo, he was, asking good questions of his aides either. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, he just wasn't even interested at all.
Oh, not at all.
Yeah.
No, there's a really terrifying piece a number of years ago, towards the end of his life, by Mark Leibowitz from the Times, and he followed McCain around for like a week, and it's just crazy. I mean, the guy just seemed absolutely off the chain.
I'd like to read that. What was that in? That was in the New York Times?
Yeah, it was a New York Times Magazine piece.
Huh. I know that on his deathbed, he goes, yeah, maybe we shouldn't have done the Iraq war. Like, man, you should just shut up. You don't even have the right to now say that. And he still didn't say he was sorry or anything.
Oh, that's
Just like
interesting. I had no idea that he even did such a thing.
Yeah. But it's like, man, you can't take none of that back. As he was a hawk the whole time for Iraq War III as well, and every bit of it, It's not like he just helped push it back in '01 and '02 when he was the first one to publicly accuse Saddam Hussein of doing the anthrax attacks and stuff. Like, come on, man.
God.
Oops. On your deathbed, you cry, oops. Come on. Anyway. Sorry, I'm rambling. How about this? I'll ask you another question. What about what you say here about they were lying about what weapons they were already giving to the Ukrainians here?
Yeah, this is another. The media, I would say, in Washington actually had a good week that week, because you had Martin's piece and then you had Politico come out with what really should be a major scandal, but has seemed to have gotten no traction at all, is that Biden has been basically lying to the American people about what he said he would not send to Ukraine. So there are these ATACMS long-range missiles that he and Jake Sullivan repeatedly said, we're not sending them, and we definitely have told the Ukrainians that we don't condone attacks on Russian territory, and all that went out the window. And actually, they did send them months ago without informing the public. So there's another question that Katrina and I raised in the piece is, what else are they not telling us? And of course, there's quite a lot that they're not telling us. There's a lot of unanswered questions about Nord Stream, for instance. I believe that there are a number of unanswered questions about the major terrorist attack that unfolded in Moscow. So there's, they are not being at all forthcoming, and they are risking, a major blow up of this thing, which we don't need, and we can't win. And I really dearly wish that Biden would pick up the phone and tell French President Macron to cool it with all the tough talk. We have to we have to start seeing things for what they are, and the war is basically lost. We have to sit down with the Russians and figure a way out of this. And escalation is not what is called for.
Yeah.
Hey guys, I've had a lot of great webmasters over the years, but the team at expanddesigns.com have by far been the most competent and reliable. Harley Abbott and his team have made great sites for the show and the Institute, and they keep them running well, suggesting and making improvements all along. Make a deal with expanddesigns.com for your new business or news site. They will take care of you. Use the promo code SCOTT and save $500. That's expanddesigns.com. Man, I wish I was in school so I could drop out and sign up for Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom instead. Tom has done such a great job on putting together a classical curriculum for everyone from junior high schoolers on up through the postgraduate level. And it's all very reasonably priced. Just make sure you click through from the link in the right margin at scotthorton.org. Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom. Real history, real economics, real education.
Hold on just one sec. We got to make some money here. Man, Starbucks' support for Israel's ethnic cleansing campaign is almost disgusting as their coffee. Don't you just hate them? You, me, and a lot of other people, too. It's time to boycott and divest from those genocidal blood-drinking traitors at Starbucks. But you're still going to need your caffeine in the morning. Well, you guys are going to love Moondo's coffee. It's so good, and the price is right. Check out a massive variety of awesome-tasting coffees at moondosartisancoffee.com. You'll be glad you did. That's moondosartisancoffee.com. I mean, this is the thing is, people might argue that, look, you can't sell this country out when they're defending themselves. A more powerful country has invaded them. And even if there were some provocations, it's still, this or that. But to defeat them, we would have to all die, too, in an entire general thermonuclear war. That just happens to be who we're dealing with here. So you could, whatever wrong argument you have about invading Iraq, Iraq really can't hit us back. We might anger some terrorists going to hit us later or something, but it's not the same thing here. And so the whole point has always been that this is going to end by negotiation, and it could have ended a long time ago. And so you talk in your article, you got some statistics that just absolutely put the lie to the idea that what America and NATO are doing here is helping Ukraine. We're just not.
No, not at all. The country's completely destroyed. I mean, by any metric that you look at, population, GDP, you have, even according to the BBC Ukrainian service, 650,000 military-aged men have fled the country. So what we have is sort of a similar situation that confronted us in Vietnam, where you had a quote-unquote ally that really wasn't willing to actually fight. Now, there have been a lot of, there are Ukrainians who have fought bravely and lost their lives. I don't want to minimize that, but 650,000 people of military-aged men have fled that country. Millions more have fled, and they're not coming back. So what you have is Ukraine on the road to becoming a rump state. And what's really horrible about the whole thing is that this was really and truly an unnecessary war. This did not have to happen, but we in Washington pushed and pushed and pushed it, and we lied to them. We, as John Mearsheimer likes to say, we led Ukraine down the primrose path. We made all these fulsome promises, and basically what happened is that their country is now destroyed. They should have learned the lesson of Georgia in 2008. But we never really seemed to learn from our mistakes. And unfortunately, we're now in the process. This is not noted very much in the press, but we're in the process of trying to lead, we're getting more and more involved in the Caucasus now, and we're leading Armenia down the same path that we led Georgia and Ukraine. And it's a really dangerous situation. We seem to be opening up ever more fronts in the new Cold War. We have our fingers in a lot of activity in Serbia, in the Caucasus, and this stuff is, there's just no end to it, and it's totally, utterly unnecessary, and all for the sake of prolonging this zombie 75-year-old military alliance. It makes no sense, and it doesn't make the American people safer, and it certainly doesn't make the Eastern Europeans safer.
Yeah, I mean, when you see this guy Emmanuel Macron talking all tough, and then the Russians announce that they're going to do some nuclear weapons exercises to make sure they're fresh. Geez, I don't really think our security forces have the right to put us in that situation and increase the risk of thermonuclear war over Ukraine, which is by no stretch of the imagination our responsibility. It's completely crazy that this is still going on. 2 years into this war, and the only plan is make sure definitely keep it going past the election, and then I guess we'll see how bad Ukraine loses after that.
Yeah, there's really no end in sight. I mean, that there is there's a peace conference coming up sponsored by Switzerland in the beginning of June, but you can't really have a real peace conference if you refuse to invite one of the main players in the war, meaning Russia. So, there are all these kind of half steps and head fakes toward.
I mean, what does that even mean at all, James? A peace conference where Russia's not invited. What did they even discuss there?
Right. It's just basically they're there once again to hear out the Ukrainians and Zelensky, who seems to be increasingly not only authoritarian but increasingly delusional, and indeed embattled in his own country. It'll be very interesting to see how his future unfolds over the next 6 to 8 months. I get a sense just from what you read that perhaps he is not, he's not long for the job. But we'll have to see. And I think you're sadly correct that the administration is going to keep this thing going at least through the election. Then of course, the big question mark is if the election doesn't go Biden's way and it goes Trump's way, what will he do? And I don't really see a lot of hope that he will do too much different from what Biden is doing. That is, if you go on who is currently advising him. He gave a very long interview in Time magazine for its cover story recently. And it was a lot of words, but he said actually very, very little. So yeah, there are very few anti-war forces in Washington, but of course that's an old story.
Yeah, I know that there are headlines that I have saved the tabs somewhere. I'm going to get to them at some point. I know, but it's another chapter in the intervention in Georgia there, where there are massive protests against another attempt at passing this foreign NGO law. And it's self-explanatory right there. Who's backing the protests? The foreign NGOs and those who are dependent on their money. That's all it is.
I mean, I would direct your listeners to a very good piece on that controversy and that piece of legislation by Helen Andrews at American Conservative.
Oh, is that right? I actually have your American Conservative article in front of me right now that I was about to ask you about, but now I'm opening up the homepage in a new tab too.
So, but Helen makes the eminently sensible point that, these foreign agent laws are totally sensible. Would you want, the foreign organizations, coming here telling us telling us how to, run things. It's crazy. But, this is another ginned up controversy. Basically, the Georgia Dream Party is it's like a Georgia First party. There's nothing wrong with that. These people have every right to run their countries the way that they see fit. And if it upsets our bureaucrats at USAID or whatever, well, too bad.
Yeah, seriously. And imagine, especially with the track record of especially the Soros NGOs, but a lot of others too, and the way that they intervene in all the color-coded revolutions and so forth. Imagine pretending that all that is the height of legitimacy, and anyone trying to stop it are the real enemies of democracy.
Right. Exactly.
Whereas democracy means America's national interest as defined by whoever happens to be in power in the U.S. government at any given moment.
Right. I just can't understand what it is about these laws that upsets that upsets our governing class so much. What exactly? I mean, besides the fact that a lot of these people, again, couldn't find Georgia on a map, what is really the strategic interest that we have here?
Well, the BTC pipeline.
These places,
It's the pipeline, man, where we cut out Iran and Russia both by taking that oil west to Turkey.
It always comes down to energy.
Yeah. Well, and cutting the Russians out. That's what it is, It's not just for the money. It's for making sure they can't have it or have control of it. And which is, by the way, it brings up, if you go back to the War of 2008, where the Russians were like 10 miles away from the pipeline, they could have just walked right over there and turned the thing off if they'd wanted to, and they didn't.
Right.
They're trying to keep open the possibility of future relations with us. It was, after all, the Georgians that started that war.
So. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Confirmed by a very in-depth report issued by the European Union. But again, that is something that never gets mentioned here.
Yep. All right. So, listen, tell me more about Armenia and what's going on there. I know that last fall, America and I guess the rest of the planet turned away as they finished finally being cleansed out of Nagorno-Karabakh there at the hands of the Azerbaijanis. That last little bit of them there. But I don't know the rest of... I lost track of who's in power in Armenia and whether the Americans are for them or against them.
Yeah, so the Prime Minister, Pashinyan, is basically seen correctly, in my view, by many of his fellow countrymen as an American puppet. And he has done his very best. He came to power in and around 2018-19, and in something called the Velvet Revolution. And this guy is an old crony of George Soros's, which is always trouble. And he has been doing his best to alienate Armenia's traditional guarantor of security, which is Russia. And that pleases the American elites, but it puts them in a very difficult, it puts his people in a very difficult position because, it was the Russian peacekeepers who, for a very long time, kept the disputed territory of Nagorno-Karabakh from being, wiped out by the Azerbaijanis. Well, thanks to Pashinyan's determination to alienate the Russians, that's exactly what happened. And so you had an instance last September of ethnic cleansing of that republic, and it is no more. And the Azerbaijanis have been working. They've been funded. Their military has been supplied by the Israelis, and they work hand in hand with the Turks to squeeze Armenia. And Pashinyan just had to give up a number of villages on the border. So it looks to some like there may well be, another invasion, and they're going to take another bite out of that country.
Yeah, because there's a piece of
and-
Azerbaijan in Armenia's west where they're separate. It's their own little Nagorno-Karabakh on the Turkish-Armenian border there. So they want a corridor to it and to take all of that. But you're saying that, if I understand you right, that because America has, kind of pulled this guy away from Russia's orbit, that means that Russia's not there as the bigger brother to him to the Azerbaijanis, that they better not try it because Russia would protect Armenia. So that's sort of what's given Azerbaijan license to go ahead and now cleanse Nagorno-Karabakh last fall and look at, I always forget the name of it, that little enclave in the west there.
Well, that's exactly right. And that is exactly what's happening. And of course, traditionally it was the Russians and the Iranians who were the guarantors of Armenian security. But this guy wants to cozy up to the Americans. And the best way to do that is to alienate Russia and to alienate Iran. But he's doing it at a terrible cost.
Man, ain't that something? Another section of my book I got to write. There's a lot of James Carden in my book, You're good on things. I'm like, when you said that about the EU investigation, I'm like, do I have that? I think I do, but I'm going to make sure. But anyway, so listen, I want to ask you too before we go. Wait, what time is it? How much time do I have? Oh, I got to go. That's not fair. I wanted to ask you about this other article. Well, listen, everybody, James writes all this great stuff at TAC, the American Conservative Magazine as well. And as I say, he's at ACURA, which is the American Committee on East-West Accord. And wait, no, I said it wrong. That's the old name. The American Committee on Russia Accord, right?
Yeah, U.S.-Russia Accord.
U.S.-Russia Accord. God, I'm terrible.
Visit us at usrussiaaccord.org.
Yes, exactly. And writes regularly at The Nation as well. All right, great. Thank you so much, James. Appreciate you, man.
Thanks, Scott. Take care.
The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA, APSradio.com, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.